Imagine you wake up one morning and there is nobody there. You search your home and everyone is gone. Walk around your neighborhood, neighbors are gone. No one on the streets or the highways, no one in the stores or the malls or the coffee shops. You make phone calls and send texts, no responses. Everyone is completely gone in the world except for you. If you're having difficulty imagining this possibility, it's probably because our minds know that this is not actually possible. But to the extent that we have difficulty imagining our life without other people, that might suggest to us a little bit about the extent to which we sometimes take our relationships for granted. In the film Castaway, the hero, Chuck, played by Tom Hanks, he was thrown into this reality when he was on a deserted island, all alone, and in the process of trying to survive, he accidentally did what any of us would probably want to do if we were in that reality. He created a friend. And although it was just a volleyball, Wilson, to Chuck, was so much more. He personified this volleyball. And it was this connection to this imagined person that fueled his desire to stay alive and survive and eventually find his way back home. He even had fights with Wilson. Kicked him out of the cave once, and then suddenly realized he doesn't know how to swim. So I got to go back and get him. And if you saw the film, you probably remember Chuck's reaction when he lost Wilson. You might even remember for yourself how you felt watching that happen. Because we all know intuitively that it is our relationships that matter the most to us, that fuel our lives. All of our accomplishments and our tendency to want to do well in life and have a great career and make money and get an education and take care of our health and be active socially, all of that, all of the achievements that we sometimes strive for in life, matter only to the extent that we can connect those achievements to at least one other person, one other relationship. And we know this intuitively, but how often do we invest the time and the energy to build better relationships? Often we take our relationships, including our most important ones, for granted. So, for myself, I learned this unexpectedly as well. When I was 22 years old, at the time, my younger brother, my only brother, Jerry, he was 18 at the time, and he and a couple of his friends were about to go on a weekend trip, Labor Day weekend, and they had never done anything like this before, gone that far away for that long by themselves, and so it was kind of a big deal. So before they left, they stopped by to say so long, and when they showed up, I was on a phone call, and it must have been an important phone call, because rather than end the call and go outside and connect with my brother, I just took the phone out with me, carried it out with me, said a quick, so long, see you later, have fun. I went back inside and continued my call, and he went on his way, he and his friends. It was impossible for me to know that that would be the last time that I would see my brother alive. He and one of his friends would die in a car accident that Labor Day coming home. The other friend would be left with permanent brain damage. And as tragic as this was for all of our families and our close friends, what resonated with me the most was the regret that I had. The regret that I experienced was similar to the regret that a lot of people experience when they lose a close loved one, which was simply that I did not really communicate to him what he meant to me, how much I cared about him, how much I loved him, how much I admired him for who he was in the world, who he was in my life, and who I observed him being in the lives of other people. I never actually said anything like that, because saying something like that requires vulnerability. And especially for me as a young man, and I know it's true for a lot of young people and young men, being vulnerable like that is risky. So we kind of put it aside. Don't really say fully what we feel. But when we do, when we take the time to invest in our relationships, we build relationships that not only matter to us, but matter to other people. And we also recognize it in other people when we see the best type of relationships happening in the world. We recognize people who express courage in their relationship, they're honest with each other, they have integrity with each other, ones who have empathy and compassion, and who are able to creatively be with each other in ways that are different or unique. We also know it when we are able to we're able to create that for ourselves. But do we always create what is truly possible in our most important relationships? I'll suggest that there is work for us to do. And so as I reflected on this experience that I had with my brother, and I also paid attention to other relationships differently because of that experience, and in the work that I do with students and clients over the years, I've learned from my students and clients how they have been able to accomplish their most valued relationships. It led me to have some understanding about what it takes to create what it is we all ultimately want, which is the best possible relationships. All relationships fundamentally begin through contact. And contact occurs the moment you're in the same place, in the same time, with other people. So all of you right now in this moment actually have a relationship with one another. You're probably not thinking about it so much, but you're in the same place at the same time, and so there's some things going on that are important in how you be in the world, and the quality of how you're able to communicate openly and honestly sets a foundation for how you could possibly create an actual friendship. Some of you might meet someone new here today and form a friendship, but it begins here. Now, automatically with this first dimension comes the second dimension, and that is agreement. And so agreement is something that, for the most part, at least initially, doesn't happen actually as agreement. It happens through assumptions and expectations. As an example, if you would have seen somebody here, as you're settling in and getting into your chairs, you would have seen somebody drop some money on the floor. You probably would have, and you noticed it and they didn't, you probably would have had the thought that I probably should go over and, well, this is a TEDx audience, so you would have gone over and just picked it up and put it in your pocket, right? No, actually, you would have probably been inspired, of course, to go give it back to them. And we have all kinds of ways in which we establish contact, and we operate out of assumptions and expectations, hoping that eventually they become agreements. But whether they do or not, whenever they are not met, whenever an agreement is broken, a promise is broken, or an expectation isn't realized, an assumption isn't realized, in any kind of relationship, you ultimately find yourself in the third dimension, which is conflict. In conflict, this one's the tough one, because for the most part, we tend to walk around the world with negative conversations in our mind about conflict. Most people don't like it. The word itself tends to have a negative connotation. But we also know that it's inevitable. Just ask any married couple who's been together for any length of time whether or not they ever have conflict. Raise your hand if you ever have conflict in your most important relationships. Some of you need to be doing this, because you know who you are and that it's inevitable. But what is it really? What is conflict really? It really is essentially just a perception of difference. And there's a lot of ways in which we are different. And we can spend a lot of time talking about that, but we kind of know when it's occurring, and we don't always deal with it the best way that we could. When I reflect back on my relationship with my brother, it didn't really matter so much that I didn't know what was about to happen. What matters is that I was blind to my own inner conflict, that I was unwilling to be honest with him about how I felt about him, and I lost the chance. And it's okay because I got to learn from that. And it helped me in my other relationships. And so when we recognize the value of conflict, it can make all of the difference. What conflict allows for in your relationships, first of all, it can solidify your values. You sometimes learn what's important to you or what's important to someone else when you're in conflict with them. You also have an opportunity to get outside of your comfort zone, to become someone that you normally would not be. And sometimes that's a good thing, to expand who you think you are. And sometimes that only occurs in the face of perceived conflict. Sometimes you have an opportunity to take a stand for someone. Sometimes that someone is yourself. And you realize that you can take care of yourself more when you're in the face of conflict, or you are willing to take a stand for someone else. When I looked back in my relationship with my brother, I was trying to search for ways in which I attempted to actually communicate love to him. And I remembered a time when we were both little, when a bigger kid hurt him, and in defense of him, I went and confronted that big kid, pushed him and got in his face and yelled at him and told him what I was going to do to him if he hurt my brother again. And my brother saw this happening. So something allowed that to occur so that he at least had some sense of who I was for him. But it wouldn't have happened without conflict. Now, ironically, that big kid and I became best friends. That happens too. You can imagine in your own lives meeting someone, creating a friendship for the first time, and it's all going great. Then you have your first fight. But you work it out. You work through it. You talk it out. And when you get to the other side of the conflict, if you did work it out, you probably felt closer to that person. Conflict can be valuable if we see it as such. It allows for greater intimacy. And at the very least, it reminds us that we are actually never alone. But we sometimes don't allow for the possibility of the value. So it's helpful when we do remember that the process of creating relationship, in the process of creating relationship, that any relationship worth having, you must be willing not to have. You must be willing to go through the difficult times and risk the relationship by being authentic and truthful and honest and clean and clear and mindful. And so as you progress in your relationships in life, and if you want to build better relationships, just keep in mind the way that they get created to begin with. It all begins with a clarity of how you communicate, how you connect, and if you connect. And that gets extended into the ways in which you create agreements with people and how you're able to transition out of expectations and assumptions into actual agreements. And then from there, when those agreements don't happen or they get broken, which they inevitably will, how you see the conflict as a utility, as an opportunity, rather than as something to be avoided. And in the process of all of this, which is not linear, because it doesn't happen step by step, it doesn't happen easily or conveniently, but in the entire process over the course of time, when you do this work, and if others are doing it with you as well, you increase the possibility of actual partnership. And that is what ultimately, I say, we all want, especially with the people we're closest with. Thank you.